So, welcome listeners to episode 2 of the ForthCast, which is called Offshore Wind, Less Talk, More Walk. My name is Emma Harrick. I am the Director of Energy Transition and Supply Chain at Scottish Renewables, and I'm here today at Forthport's Port of Dundee. And I'm joined by David Webster, who is one of Forthport's regional directors, and also joined by Callum Hogan, who is an asset manager for Forth Projects. Thanks for being willing interviewees today. So we're here today just to talk all about offshore wind, the opportunity on everyone's lips. And we know that offshore wind presents Scotland and the UK with the biggest economic opportunity that many of us will see in our lifetimes. A green industrial revolution, if you will. The pipeline in Scotland for offshore wind is actually quite mind-boggling, I think you'll agree, in the sense that we have, 27 gigawatts of projects with seabed leasing rights through the Crown Estate of Scotland's ScotWind leasing round, and more through their INTOG leasing round, which is the Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas Decarbonisation. So there's significant activity around the rest of the UK too, and across the globe, as countries work to decarbonise their energy system, create energy security, and of course to tackle climate change. But as we know, there are a few barriers to deploying offshore wind in Scotland, not the least of which is around streamlining and speeding up consenting to make sure we have that certain pipeline of projects and creating investor confidence. We also need to make sure that we get the green electrons from where they're generated at offshore wind farms to the homes and businesses that use it, which of course means building all of that enabling grid transmission and distribution infrastructure. And we also need to make sure that we build that skilled, capable supply chain in Scotland and the UK to deliver all of these projects and all of this infrastructure, from the design and the construction and installation all the way through to the operations and maintenance. These companies will be really essential to all of that. We know that the industry and government is working hard to tackle some of these challenges. It's all been led by the UK government's Clean Power 2030 action plan, which is sort of paving the way for the pathway to a clean power energy system. And that's sort of backed up by a number of initiatives, lots of them looking at supporting the supply chain. Recently, we've seen the Clean Industries bonus, which has just opened, which is all about creating sustainable supply chains. And we have things like the National Well Fund as well. And that's just at a UK level. In Scotland, we have 500 million funding on the table for a growing supply chain from the Scottish Government, as well as their work through the Scottish National Investment Bank and through their enterprise agency. So there's lots of work going on, and it's clear that offshore wind's got the attention of policymakers around the country. We also know that in the face of these challenges, there's lots of great work already going on in the supply chain in Scotland and the UK for renewable energy and offshore wind. There's businesses who are rolling up their sleeves, they're investing in their skills, their capabilities and their facilities to make sure that they can harness this opportunity and grow their business for that. And of course, one of these impressive businesses is Forthports. You are an organisation that has seen the opportunity within offshore wind and has been investing in your business to work in that sector. Some would say with a healthy risk appetite, but you've put your hand in your pocket to, invest in those facilities. So just before we get into some more questions around the journey that Forthports has taken in offshore wind, can we please just learn more about yourself, David and Callum? So if you could take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your journey to how you've, made it to your role today. I know, David, you're a bit of a transition story with a background in oil and gas. So if you could tell us a bit more about that would be great.
Thank you, Emma. It's really great to have you back in the Port of Dundee. We always enjoy working with Scottish Renewables. My career really has came full circle. I was born in Dundee, brought up in Dundee. I studied engineering in Dundee. I worked in the oil and gas industry international for a number of years. I also went back to university partway through my career and studied for an MBA, which is a Master of Business and Administration. And then I moved out of the oil and gas sector and joined Forthports as the port manager in Dundee. And I've been really fortunate to have been a part of the evolution of Dundee and setting up Dundee for future generations. I did that for a number of years, and then I moved into a wider role, which included the Port of Leith in Edinburgh, and effectively continued to grow the Port of Leith. I'm now looking forward to my future role of Regional Director at Tilbury and working across the Port of Tilbury in London.
Callum, can you tell us more about your role at Forth Projects and sort of your career journey?
Yes, thanks, Emma. So, similar to David, I'm from the local area. I went to Dundee University where I studied mechanical engineering. And from there, I then went straight into the offshore industry. So went into installation side, work initially on pipe lay, then to subsea installation. And then in closer to 2020, I moved into offshore wind installation, focused on foundations and cable installation. Similar to David as well, I've worked globally. So initially I started working in the North Sea, working between Norway, Denmark and the Netherlands, and then branched out into Taiwan and then the Middle East following that. Then I realised that there's massive opportunities in Scotland and following ScotWind and whatnot, and my skill set is very much it's very technical, and trying to keep it within Scotland is really my main goal. So this opportunity came up to join Forth Ports as a technical manager, where I work closely with David into that role, work focusing mostly on the tendering of the offshore wind projects and bits and bobs in floating wind. And then that's then brought me where I am in my role just now as the asset manager for Forth Projects. So really it's been very much a full circle role, going from university in Dundee and growing up here, working globally and bringing my skills back to contribute to the local community.
Again, quite a rich sort of diverse background in different sectors. And, why wouldn't you want to come back to Dundee and to work in renewable energy? Because it is a hugely exciting market, particularly here in Scotland. So, really interesting. It'd be great to just learn a bit more as well about Forth Ports' journey. I know, Scottish Renewables has worked pretty closely with Forth Ports over the years. So we're quite familiar with the journey that you have gone on. And as members of Scottish Renewables, we've heard from you in your participation on our panel sessions and in our roundtables. But could you tell the listeners just a bit more about Forth Ports' journey? You've been investing in renewable energy and in your facilities for quite some time. So, can you talk me through that process and maybe some of the challenges that you faced to sort of cement yourself as a key player in the offshore wind supply chain?
Yeah, so our journey really started in Dundee. So if you cast our minds back to sort of 2015, we were looking at the Port of Dundee and saying, right, what do we need to do to future-proof this facility? And we then started looking outwards and looking at what the market was doing at a very high level, at sort of a macro level. So you would be looking at it and you would be saying, right, historically, and throughout time, the North Sea has always been something that has provided a lot of economic benefit. It's a huge resource for Scotland and the UK. And that benefit over centuries has changed. In the last century, it's all been about oil and gas, and that has provided huge benefit to our country. From everything from energy security to the cost of energy. And laterally you get into this thing which is, I think it's probably a relatively new thing, called the energy trilemma, where the third part of that comes into is the environmental side of things, the sustainability, and how we are going to move from where we are today into something completely different, which is all about how we look after the natural environment, how we get to net zero. And there's a few options for that, and everything is, it's certainly an emerging market. So you look at that and you say, well, how is the North Sea going to play into that? So you've obviously there's the option around the nuclear side of things, but there's tidal energy. We've been involved significantly, actually, in some of the pioneering work that's been done around tidal energy, with building the O2 turbine tidal generator in Dundee and deploying it in the Tate, and then it was towed to its final site. But also the offshore wind opportunity. And so when you look at it from a government target basis, and you look at what the government is doing around planning and the ScotWind that's came out recently, there is a very compelling case to pay attention to that. So back in 2015, we were in a position where, like a number of ports were in this position, and there's a term that's coined in the industry called a PowerPoint port. So it's people creating PowerPoints of what could be. And we were kind of in that area at that time, and it was like, right, well, what could be? And we started off by saying, well, we've got a quayside that we could do more with, which is Prince Charles Wharf. And we said, right, well, we'll build Prince Charles Wharf extension. And one of the very first business cases that I produced was to build Prince Charles Wharf extension. And so we did that, and we completed that. And what that really did is it opened a lot of doors for us, because the industry started to sit up and say, well, actually, Forth Ports is not just a company that comes up with PowerPoint ideas, it comes up with action. We're interested in being ready for this market and invest ahead of demand. So what that then led to was us building a relationship with the Nartnagoit team and their turbine OEM. And as that project matured and they got to financial close, they were ready to step and say, well, we're actually now ready to choose a port. And they came to us and said, like, look, your port, we like what you've done with it, but it's not ready for us. And here is what our turbine OEM wants. So we were saying, right, well, that's fine. So we took it's called the minimum harbour requirements. We took that, mapped that across the infrastructure and said, well, we could deliver that. And that's exactly what we did. We just went and we delivered that. And, the rest kind of history from that perspective. So our journey then led us to sort of getting into this world where you have the enterprise agencies writing reports and saying, well, there's not enough capacity in Scotland to meet the demand of this future market. And the market was quite quickly evolving over the years. And so we started to say, right, well, we didn't like being in this, I would call it the kind of, probably the wrong terminology, but the danger zone between when a developer reaches financial close and is ready to commit to a port and when they need the port. There's quite a short time frame there. And when you're building big infrastructure, being in that zone, you don't have a lot of time. So it becomes a little bit uncomfortable in terms of a risk profile. So we started looking at the wider sort of Scottish market, the Scottish supply chain, the Scottish port sector, and saying, right, how could we solve the problem for Scotland in terms of capacity? And clearly, the Port of Leith in Edinburgh was a facility that was heavily involved in oil and gas. It had been Shawcor were in the port for 50 years, and they were manufacturing oil and gas pipelines. And as the energy transition evolved, we're not building oil and gas pipelines in Scotland. So they after 50 years left the port. But before that happened, we'd already started the front end planning of how we would turn Leith into this renewables hub that it is today, which is, looking at constructing an outer berth and looking at making up this huge facility we now have. So our journey kind of led us up to that point. And where we're at today now is, we've delivered this infrastructure and we have developed a supply chain in Forth projects, and the journey is where we are today. And I guess we'll probably come into more detail of this as we move on, but that's the kind of the really the history of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really interesting story that you talk through, and that changing landscape on, the role that ports are playing in Scotland's infrastructure. You mentioned the sort of challenge between ahead of time investment and sort of building this infrastructure before the demand is necessarily there and certain. So it's that classic chicken and egg scenario. So it kind of actually nicely leads me on to what my next question was, which is obviously there has been significant investment here in Dundee and at the Port of Leith, and also from a Forth Project's point of view within the sort of heavy lift and marine capability. So can you tell me about the sort of level of risk that was there for Forth Ports in terms of committing to that investment in advance of the demand for these services from the offshore wind sector? And it'd be good to hear of that from both sides of the table here in terms of the port itself, but also in that wider full service delivery.
Yeah, well, I can cover the port bit off, and actually, I think if you look at it from our perspective, we actually don't think it's particularly risky. It's all about understanding the market, and in the offshore wind market, the challenge is that developers just don't have the capability to invest ahead of demand, because they're project entities. They're set up with project funding, so until they get to financial close, they are very much in a unfinanced state. So they're effectively having to fund it through their own companies, if you know what I mean. So like your project developer set up companies to be able to then effectively get bank funding to then go and do the developments. So when you then look at it from the port perspective, we build infrastructure that lasts for 100 years. So we're not necessarily having to just build it specifically for offshore wind. All port infrastructure is multi-purpose. So quaysides can be used for a variety of things. Land space is always something that is in demand in ports. But that doesn't get us away from having to write rigorous business cases and understand the market. So understand the market and investing ahead of demand is really the only way that you can be ready for this market. Because being in the post-FID and wait until a developer comes along and gives you the security to be able to invest doesn't work particularly well in this market. You have to be ready in advance. So how we did that was to look at probably 3 different levels of business case. So if you look at the top level of business case, what you're doing with that is you're trying to say, this is what the government are saying. So if you look at it back before Scotland was released, the government had all these net zero targets, and they then instructed the Marine Directorate, I think it was Marine Scotland at the time, to go and look at where they could deploy offshore wind around Scotland. So they came up with these draft plan option areas, which were a consultation process, and said, we've got all these draft plan option areas. And then Crown Estates, who were then going to be the company that, or the entity, I should say, that were developing these or effectively auctioning these sites off to the future developers, then named it Scotland. So when we were doing the Leith business case, we wrote the paper in such a way that said, this is what the government target is, this is what the deployment rate would have to be at to get to that, and this is what the current actions are. So it's all very, very high level, and it's like macro based. If you then come down a level and you say, right, well, what's one step down, or what one step more sure in it from a business case perspective is, and this is exactly what happened. So when we did our first business case, we said, right, what we really want to do is we want to do a due diligence on Leith. So we want to look at gaining consent for what we're trying to do. We want to look at doing site investigation works. We want to look at getting a tender done for the development. So we then start getting more certainty over a number of things. So like, how much is it going to cost to build? What's the realistic timelines? How are we going to do this? So we went through that due diligence process over a period of a year based on this high-level business case that we wrote. We then saw in that time frame that Scotland was released, and you went from draft plan option areas to named developers and named projects. So you're no longer talking about draft plan option area 1, you're talking about Ossian, or you're talking about Morven. So your business case then matures along with the process that you're taking the journey of the infrastructure along. It still doesn't get us to a contract back business case, which is the best place to be, where you've got a developer saying, I'm going to take your port. So you still need to get to that point, but you can do it in such a way that it's based on market knowledge, understanding contracts, and understanding how you're going to deliver these things. So what we then did was we took that and says, right, we've been starting to do all these tenders, and we've been getting bombarded with tenders because suddenly we've got a reputation in the industry of being actually not just a PowerPoint port, but being an actual player in the industry. We've got an active project going on in Dundee. All the turbine OEMs are interested in us. The developers are interested in us. So very quickly we went from 0 to a huge amount of tenders. And it was at that point that we realised that we need to start growing our organisation we'd been working with supply chain in Dundee for a number of years on trying to do a bit more of the activity in our port. So like offering port services effectively to improve the attractiveness of our ports to our customers so that we would be giving them a better, more certain service. And in doing that, we brought in other local companies, and it was Oilmac that we brought in to do the heavy lift in the craneage. And we worked really, really well with the Oilmac team to the point where it got to a point of saying, right, well, actually, these people are almost like part of our business. So we then went through the acquisition process and brought them into the Forth Ports family, and then we rebranded it as Forth Projects. So you've got these two things kind of happen at the same time, where we've built up a reputation in the business by delivering Dundee. We've then got to a point where Leith in the business case is really strong. We've got a tendered cost for doing it. We've got a design and build contractor set up, and we've got a new entity within the business called Forth Projects, which then brings me on to Callum. So we then thought, well, we need to kind of strengthen our team technically to be able to start responding to a lot of the technical stuff we're doing. We need to make sure we're building the infrastructure to the right requirement to make sure we're delivering what the industry needs. And we'll have all these pieces of the puzzle. It's almost like all the ingredients, and we're ready to bake the cake. So that's where we then went out to the market and started looking at bringing in the best technical resource we could possibly find, which then brings in Callum. So, you know, and then Forth Projects and Callum then came into the picture and really kind of started to grow. So I'll pass it on to you, Callum, in terms of...
Yeah, it'd be great to hear just about how you've invested in, you know, wrapping that capability all together to create that full service solution, and then what you've invested in within Forth Projects. Because it sounds like what you're telling me is that the journey you've went on is if you've seen the opportunity in the pipeline, right? You've seen that there is all of these offshore wind farm projects that you could play a key part in. You know, ports are the linchpin of our offshore wind ambition. So you've seen that opportunity. And, you know, even though there are challenges, like I mentioned in the beginning, in terms of the consenting for these projects, and before they reach their final investment decision, they've got to go through that. They've got to get their grid connection, they've got to consent, and they also have to find their economics, their route to market through the contracts for different schemes. So there's all these kind of steps before they reach final investment decision, and you've looked at that and you've then prepared the business case around the whole market, and that's enabled you to invest in the business, not only just in the port, but in creating, you know, an enhanced service offering for the market. So if you could just tell us more about how Forth Projects plays into that and what its role is.
Yeah, absolutely. So as David said, when I initially joined Forth Ports, was as the technical manager for Forth Projects. And that was really to lead the tendering and the technical aspects of all the offshore wind projects we bring in. And very quickly what we found is that Forth Projects, or previously Oilmac, they're already working on a base work within the ports. And when it comes to delivering the offshore wind projects, there's a real opportunity there to deliver a full turnkey package for these projects. And the beauty of Forth Projects is that we're underpinned by the infrastructure of Forth Ports. And that being market leading class as that already is, our ambition now is to make Forth Projects the market leader in marshalling services to help deliver these projects. And when it comes from a risk perspective, it is, from our viewpoint, very low risk, as we're doing what we do best, which is delivering projects for offshore wind.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I was actually at the port of Leith earlier this week. It was a gloriously sunny day, and I was standing on the very shiny new, expansive, hard standing. But also there was one of your SPMTs, which is your self-propelled modular transporters, which obviously part of that sort of heavy lift Forth Projects offering. For those that are not so familiar with this sort of kit that's required and like what Forth Ports actually does as part of Forth Projects, can you just tell us a bit more about the equipment that you've invested in, and, you know, how does that all work? How do you move things around the key sites as Forth Projects?
Yeah, so Forth Projects, so we have a base set of equipment. So we have mobile cranes can lift up to 600 tonne, but also we have a fleet of SPMTs, and we've actually just invested close to £7 million in a brand new fleet of 48 tonne axles. And what these SPMT axles actually do is move very big components, which are very heavy, around the site. As discussed there, we spent close to £7 million to help deliver the Inchcape project, and this is brand new equipment that we're looking to bring into the Forth Projects asset.
Yeah. be great to hear a bit more about that project just a bit later on. But also similarly, David, from your side, so for those that are not so familiar with what port infrastructure sort of entails, can you tell us a bit about what your money buys when it comes to investing in new quaysides and new hard standing and the sort of essential equipment that goes along with that? And what does, the finished product look like? Paint us that picture as if we were standing sort of on the quayside with our hard hat on. What does all this stuff actually look like in reality?
I think when I first started working in the port sector, the biggest surprise I had is how little you get for your money in terms of port infrastructure. The sums of money that you have to invest in these ports is astronomical. I mean, in Dundee, we've spent around about 40 million, and that has been 2 quaysides and around about 200,000 square metres of land make up. And what you will have at the end of it, it doesn't actually look very much when you're standing on it other than just flat open space. But the technical detail behind it and what it has to be verifiably capable of doing is so important, because this is one of the biggest challenges in the offshore wind industry, which is why the port capacity thing existed, is that infrastructure that was built in the 1970s and 80s and 90s is just not capable of delivering the technical capability that's required for this market. So you have the never-ending challenge in ports is ships getting bigger and ports need to be deeper. That's obviously the first challenge. The second challenge is having the available land space, because these components are really big, they're really heavy, and they take up a lot of space, and it's very much intrinsically linked to project risk is the amount of space you've got, because it's about not impacting the critical path when you're building out these projects. And then the loading capability. So most of what is on the port is under the ground. So it's, when you're standing on a quayside, it just looks like this bit of concrete, but it's actually half a metre of reinforced concrete on so many steel piles that have been driven into the ground. And then there's revetments, and then there's a dredge box in front of it. So there's a lot to this infrastructure. And when you look at the industry, there is basically a hierarchy of requirement that the developers look at. So the first thing is geographical proximity. So the closer the port is to the development, the better it is from a risk perspective, because it's shorter transit times, less weather risk, and a number of other things. The second thing is then water depth. Can you get the installation vessels in and out?
Yep.
Because if you can't do that, then you can't do that particular part of the construction project. And then, is there enough land to be able to store the components and move the components around and pre-assemble the components? And then finally, is the quayside in that strong enough? And most of these things are you can fix with investment. But like I said at the start, the level of investment that you have to put into ports is eye-watering. It really is.
Yeah. And, as you say, you're standing on the quayside, but a lot of it is actually beneath the surface in terms of that reinforcement. And I was there the other day, we were talking about, the sheet piles that are going in to enable dredging, and the Biscalas vessel was there. It was dredging to make the water channels deeper to allow access for these large vessels. And you talked about how components are getting bigger, vessels are getting bigger. So just a quick question on how do you prepare the infrastructure to future-proof it, to enable the fact that these components are getting bigger? So how do you make the call on sort of like how big do we go to enable, larger turbine blades and bigger vessels in future?
There is a little bit of a trick to that, actually, and the trick is that you have to understand the market and have a really intricate knowledge of your customers' requirements. So what we do is that we have key account managers and teams of people that work very closely with our customers to understand future technologies and so that we can then engineer the right solution for them rather than the one that we think they need it is the one that they need. And it's a collaborative thing. You know, we have a fantastic level of collaboration with everybody in the supply chain. So whether it's at the developer level, whether it's at with the turbine OEMs, all the turbine OEMs, we know them all really well. You know, we've had tours of their factories. We've obviously delivered projects with them. We're trying to develop factories. So our relationship with these OEMs and the industry is absolutely vital for our success. And then we need to translate that into a infrastructure that is fit for purpose today, but is ready for the future. So it's there is a trick to it, but the trick is collaboration.
It's that early engagement and speaking to, and you mentioned OEMs. So for those that don't know, that's original equipment manufacturers. We could put any acronyms at the show notes, I'm sure. But yeah, it's that early engagement in terms of you're not designing and planning your facility for your next project. You're designing and planning it for the next 10, 15, 20 years time, so that, you know, you're, as I say, future-proofed. And then, Callum, just from the point of view of that heavy lift capability, how do you take that into account when looking at, you know, the tonnages for the crane capability? You know, is it the same process? Is that early engagement to try and understand, okay, we're going to need to be able to lift X number of tons for our next project, but then the 5 projects after that are going to need, you know, heavier capability?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's following the exact same process. So the Forth Projects team, we work closely with the key account management team that David mentioned, and it's really understanding the requirements of our clients and making sure that our equipment reflects those requirements. And the SPMTs that we've just touched on, we've purchased, they are future-proofed. So when we have that full fleet in-house, we'll have one of the largest fleets of SPMTs within the United Kingdom, which will be 48 tonnes and close to 100 axles. So we are future-proofing ourselves now for all these projects. So when it comes to delivering the Inchcape project, the Berwick Bank project, and Morven and beyond, into floating wind projects, we will be able to support the delivery of these projects within Scotland.
I think actually, you know, I'd really like to add into this. It's like, I think it's something that I've got like a real sense of pride about, is that having worked internationally, and you see some of these really big infrastructure projects and developments being carried out overseas, and the fact is that we've managed to bring this level of development into Dundee and into Edinburgh, and then we then have local people, and I can't overemphasize how immensely proud I am of the team of people that work in Forth Projects, because they are at such a high level of technical capability of being in. They're based in Dundee. You know, these people go home every night to their homes in Dundee, but yet they're able to talk at the highest level in this industry and develop solutions for customers that are going to deliver some of the biggest offshore wind parks in the UK. And I think it's well noted in the industry when developers come and talk to us and they meet our technical teams. And, you know, I mean, what we're doing right now is we spend so much time now in planning, because we're moved into the next phase of our development. We're not in a sales mode, right? We're in a delivery mode. So we spend, and Callum and his team spend so much time on Teams calls with international companies that are trying to deliver Inchcape. So, and we're doing the front end engineering design, where we're saying, this is what you need to present us with. This is how you need to load your vessel. This is how we're going to do it. And we are really setting the tone in this industry to a level of professionalism and a level of skill and knowledge that is, you know, it is unique in Scotland to what we're doing. It really is.
Yeah, I think, and piggybacking on top of that, all those calls that we work on with Inchcape and the clients, I think our team are very skilled and their technical knowledge is world class. And what we're finding is we're helping to de-risk these projects by interjecting our knowledge. Yeah. So it's early collaboration with these clients to help de-risk the project from a whole. And it is very impressive, as David's touched on, working globally. You work with very impressive teams, and to know that it's within our local community, especially within Forth Projects, it is a very humbling thing to be a part of.
So you're telling me Dundee is just like the epicentre of the big brains. Yeah, so and that's right down to, planning out the sea fastenings and planning out all that technical detail so that everything is streamlined sort of across the whole project, so that when the vessels do arrive here at Dundee, you can safely offload them because everything's been planned out in advance.
Correct. So we're part of the process from the fabrication yards, be that China, Korea, all the way through to Dundee and Leith. So we're part of that full process from start to finish. And it's interjecting that knowledge to de-risk for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't under-emphasise the size of the components that we're now handling. I mean, foundations are 2,000 to 3,000 tonnes a piece. So we're moving 2,000 to 3,000 tonnes off of a ship onto land and moving it around the land. And we've not just got to do it once, we've got to do it 70 plus times. It is, and then when these are getting installed, we've got some of the biggest installation vessels in the world that are going to show up on our doorstep in Dundee and in Leith to pick these up. I mean, the visuals of this are, even with the NNG stuff, I mean, everybody that's lived in Dundee over the last few years will have seen the skyline covered with these with the towers, and they've seen the installation vessel coming in, and it's still a little bit surreal, when you're standing on the quayside doing this after all this planning and all this intensity of work, and then you see it actually getting delivered. It's an enormously satisfying thing to see.
Yeah, I can imagine, absolutely. So because we're talking about some of the projects themselves and that sort of delivery phase, it would be good to delve into that a little bit more. Obviously, you have successfully been working on the Naguia project for EDF here at Dundee. So it'd be good to hear about what lessons you've learned from working on that project, if there's anything you can share in that. So what were the sort of mechanics of delivering that, and how did you plan for that, and what lessons have you learned that you can take forward as well into the next projects?
Over to you, Callum.
Yeah, so the NNG project, it has been it's been a fantastic project, and the Forth Projects team, they've been involved from the start and through to where we are right now in terms of onshore and the on-site logistics piece of that, working closely with the key pre-assembly subcontractor. And a lot of the lessons that we found is that, and what we're interjecting into the Inchcape project, is early collaboration is the best way to go, and having de-risk the project from start to finish is working closely with your subcontractors, but also with your clients to create a one-team approach is the best way forward. And Forth Ports, being the port itself, being at the centre of that, we've really driven that forward.
And is that also including things like, co-location? So the project team is here on site, in the same office with the Forth Ports project team, so that they can engage on a daily basis and then, overcome any challenges come up. Is that the sort of approach you're taking?
Absolutely. So the approach that we take is to be very transparent with the entire project team. And the Forth Projects site, they're based in Dundee, close to the Siemens site, and daily we're in communication with them, highlighting any challenges that we may have, how we solve that, and how we work together to deliver it.
Yeah.
I think what's another key point to highlight with this is, I think in terms of project success, so we have delivered all the onshore logistics completely flawlessly. There's been no lost time incidents, no health and safety issues. It has been, which is the main thing, is everybody's gone home safely, which is such, it's such an enormous point of pride for us that we've managed to do that. From a collaborative perspective, so I'm more involved in the kind of early planning of this project and trying to get it to a point where everything's set up. And if you're talking from the sort of delivery point, what we did in Dundee is effectively the end of a manufacturing process for, I can name them Siemens because it's well known as Siemens. So all the turbine OEMs finish their manufacturing in a port. So that is bring all the components together and pre-assembling them. So that's like building the towers and wiring them up and things like that. So this is a very quality-driven process, which did kind of surprise me a little bit, because from a port perspective, we're all about logistics. It's like moving that. The main focus for the turbine OEMs is very much quality. So it's like, health and safety is also quality, but quality of, is everything built correctly? Have we done it safely? So what they then do is they have what's called a pre-assembly contract. Now, that's not something that we've done before. So when we were talking to them, what we said was, we kind of like to do the logistics piece because we can move big components around. We've got a great team of people. We're happy to invest in more kit, and we did actually invest in kit to do the Dundee piece. But what we then did is we collaborated with the wider Scottish supply chain. So people look at us and say, right, well, you guys must be competing with other ports in Scotland. So the other facility in Scotland that can deliver offshore wind projects is Global Energy Group's facility in Nig. And we've actually got a really good working and a very strong working relationship with them. So they have Global Wind Services, and I'm not just giving them a free plug here, but they wanted to do the pre-assembly and actually supply the pre-assembly cranes and stuff like that. So we were like, yeah, well, we'll work with them then. And it's like hand in glove with Global that we've went and we've delivered this project with them. And I think to some extent it was to the surprise of the industry, because I think there was a lot of people that were like, these guys are competition, but we're not. We're here to collaborate. We're here to deliver the best result for Scotland, and that's what we've demonstrated by working with, effectively on a port basis. You could look at them as our competitor, but on a service provision, and we have worked with them extensively in the past as well. So we've worked with them and we've delivered this, and I think credit where credit's due. The Forth Projects team, are continuing to work with the teams at Global Energy Group and Global Port Services, and we have done for a number of years. So I think that was quite a surprise to a number of people in the industry, because it was like, we thought these guys were going to be competing with each other, but they're actually not. And I think that's what's going to be key in this sector, is that collaboration's everything. There's no one in Scotland that's really competing with each other. Every port's got a part to play in this industry. Everybody will find their niche, whether it's been the operations and maintenance base, whether it been a supply base, whether it been a construction facility. I think every port in Scotland has an opportunity, and I think, to use the terminology, the pie is big enough, but the capacity needs to be as a collective, So that's really important. I thought I'd just like to kind of add that in.
No, it's a good point. It was actually one of my questions was around that collaboration piece. Obviously, collaboration is a bit of a buzzword, but you're actually putting that into practice, and sometimes it means sitting in a wee bit of an uncomfortable space with a competitor and working closely together. But it sounds like that's something you're actively practicing and doing and delivering on. So it's great to hear that. You also mentioned another thing that was one of my questions, which was around health and safety. Obviously, really very important, and it's actually on my mug here, with the safety first motto. So can you just tell us a wee bit about your approach to health and safety at Forth Ports?
Health and safety within Forth Ports is our number one absolute priority. Nothing comes before it, because we want everyone to go home safely every night, and safety. Well, our logo is safety first, so that is it, safety first. I don't think we're any different from any other large organisation that takes their corporate responsibility incredibly seriously and the safety perspective. But also, when you start going into the organisation, we have a real culture of people, caring for each other. We've got a culture within our business that is to look after each other, to look after our staff, to look after our people, and that is prevalent. I mean, I've worked all over Forth Ports. I mean, I'm now working down in the Port of Tilbury in London, and it's the same culture that we foster there as it is in Dundee, or it is in Leith, or it is in Grangemouth, and all down through our organisation. So from senior managers to supervisors to our port operators, everybody looks out for each other. Everybody's got safety as the first thing that they think about. We don't prioritise productivity over safety, financial, the financial side of things over safety. We will do it safety first, and that's really what it is. That has to be the priority. And if you do it safely, it actually comes with a lot of other good benefits. So not only does everybody go home every night, but also, the rest of the industry want to work with you, because actually our customers have the similar outlook. Everybody wants to have safety. So when you start doing big projects, safety is number one. The first thing you do when you're having a morning meeting is you have a safety moment. When you're doing a pre-job briefing, you have a safety moment. And it all ties together, because if you do things safely, you do it in a more process-driven manner, you do it in a more organised, conscious decision-making process. And then what you end up with is actually a really good result. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Yeah. It's all intrinsically linked.
Yeah, and it's really great that you pulled up on that point, that it's health and safety is the role of everybody in the organisation, and that you've embedded that in the culture. It's everyone's responsibility to promote that ethos, and I guess it does what it says on the mug: safety first. Mm-hmm. So looking forward a little bit then at your next project, which is the Inchcape project. Obviously that is set to be delivered at the Port of Leith for the foundation marshalling activity, and then also here in Dundee for the turbine marshalling activity. So can you tell us just about how you're sort of planning that project, what the execution is? Talk us through what the methodologies look like, what do your heavy lift plans look like, how is that all going to play out, and tell us a bit more just about how you're preparing for that, really.
Yeah, so the Inchcape project, it's one of the largest offshore wind farms off the east coast of Scotland, sitting at about 1.1 gigawatts. And what this means is that all 72 foundations will be stored within the Port of Leith as Forth Projects as the principal contractor for the marshalling activities. What this means is that we'll be taking the components from some of the largest delivery vessels in the world, driving them into the storage yard for storage, and then driving them back to the quayside for some of the largest installation vessels to take. And what they mean is their mega cranes will be lifting them off of the quayside, storing them on their vessel, and then installing them offshore in the offshore wind farm's location.
So what are you doing to prepare for the project?
So we're preparing for the delivery of the Inchcape project on two key parts. So for the enabling works, we're enhancing our dredge berth further, providing us with an industry-leading capability, providing an access channel and a deep water berth to deliver some of the largest vessels for both component delivery and installation vessels. And secondly, we're investing over £7 million on a brand new fleet of SPMTs to give Forth Projects one of the largest fleets of SPMTs within the UK.
I think it's also important to add, Callum, that what this enhancement is going to enable us to do is really de-risk it for Inchcape, because what we can now do is we can move away from the need to bring in ring cranes and complex shoreside operations and barge transfers and to the field by simply having the installation vessel come alongside, use its really big cranes to lift the components straight onto the ship and go out and deliver it, which really changes the dynamic and the risk profile of the project, because it allows the developer to effectively have less steps in the process. And I think that's really important to highlight that. What we're doing in Leith with the enhancements and effectively the biggest dredge in the history of the Firth of Forth is going to do is get these big ships in, which is really a big aim of our ports.
Tell us when you are sort of expecting to see the first components arriving.
Yeah, so our team are very excited about the delivery of this project. The project kick off in middle of this year, with the first components expected end of this year and installation due to kick off early next year. And what this means is that every single foundation component for the project, all 72 of them, will be on site in Leith at one time on the full marshalling yard. And as principal contractor for the project, Forth Projects are right at the centre of this project, providing value to the client.
So it's going to be a really busy site.
Extremely busy.
Yes. So we know that no port is an island, and there's going to be a whole lot of activity for the Inchcape project and also for future activity. Can we talk a little bit about the wider supply chain? So what is the opportunities for businesses located around Dundee and around Leith? Leith is centred within the heart of Edinburgh, and you've got Dundee here. And there's lots of businesses around that are, have ambitions to support that activity that's going on at the port. So can you tell us a bit about the opportunities that are there for the wider supply chain and how you can work closely with them?
Yeah, so when it comes to delivering the actual project itself, we're focused on making sure we're using local content for everything that we do. So if we're bringing in new hires into the project, right now, Forth Projects, we have 14 individuals. We'll be doubling that at least to 30 and potentially to 50 when we come into actual full-scale delivery of the project. It's all local people that we're using. Any subcontractors we use for engineering support or any procurement of items, it's all local content within Leith, Dundee and the wider Forth area. It's really just making sure that we put the word out in the local supply chain so they understand the opportunities there to support us if we need be, and making sure that they understand that.
Yeah, and David, you mentioned earlier just about the port sort of being embedded in the community, and you mentioned that there would be some, recruitment and role opportunities. Can you just tell us a wee bit more about what sort of roles are on the table? What should people be looking at, and what sort of advice you would give to people who are sort of aspiring to work in the sector?
Yeah, so really delivering the project is split into two phases. Really, we've got the project management and HSE part of this. So we're bringing in 5 HSE and quality experts to help us deliver that. Plus, we're bringing 2 graduates, so a graduate project engineer and a trainee discipline engineer to help with the actual disciplined analysis for the heavy lifts. The second phase of that is the actual operational element, and that's looking at SPMT operators and specialists, spotters, and any general support we need on site. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and we're going through the hiring process just now, and we've had a massive interest from the local community, and it's good to see that it is local individuals who are interested in those roles.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that's the thing. People, when they think about the renewable energy sector, they automatically think about, being an engineer, but there are actually such a diverse, set of roles that are required to deliver an offshore wind farm project, even like you say, just in the ports, from project managers to graduates. And it's great you're covering that whole spectrum of those that are already experienced, but also those that are new entrants to the career market and are looking to sort of start their career journey. So you've got options for everyone across the board there, which is great.
I could add a little bit more to this, actually. So in terms of what are the opportunities for the local supply chain, really what we need to try and do as a country, and I'm really a big advocate of this, is we need to try and get this to be less of a project-driven industry and more turn it into an industry, so we can get this green reindustrialization going. So it is a sequential process. So whilst yes, we as Forth Ports and as the ports are doing our bit in this, and what our bit in this is getting the investment and delivering the infrastructure to make sure that this work comes to Scotland. So we're fixing the capacity challenge, and that's really important because without the port is the direct link between the supply chain, the local community, and the projects. So we need to get that. But longer term, and this is where the government has to play a part in this, is how do we then have security of sequential projects, so that the more sequential projects we've got, the more certainty we'll have over levels of work, which will then bring the wider benefit. So it'll help companies not just turn up for one project. It's like we've got another project and we've got another one. Well, actually, this is no longer projects. This is just a conveyor belt of opportunity. And then what we've got in Leith is we've got the net zero zone, which is all about using this massive bank of land that we have within the port to look at what's the best fit to incubate the supply chain. So there's a lot of opportunities there at the moment. I mean, there's stuff in the media about building a blade factory. That would be a game changer, because that would allow us to then go from project to sustainable industry. There's a lot of other things going. There's a lot of other manufacturing opportunities, not just in Leith or in Dundee, but in the wider Scotland. And I think that's the key role here. What we've done to date is build infrastructure, build a project-based offering that integrates the local community people into delivering this. But the next step in the evolution of this is going from project to industry. That's what we need to try and do as a country. Simple as, really.
No, and you've touched on and sort of articulated really well a point that something I'm really passionate about is the opportunity across the whole supply chain. So with ports being, you know, the centre and the linchpin of a lot of that, but you've got the sort of top level manufacturing, but it also filters all the way through to the small and medium enterprises. And that can be the people who are, you know, providing scaffolding infrastructure here to help with your activity, or it could be even, you know, the local shops that are giving the team their morning bacon rolls. You know, it's the whole sort of ecosystem of economic opportunity, and you know, SMEs are kind of the grassroots of that economic growth from, you know, investing in the people that they train and hire, and expanding from, you know, 10 employees to 50 employees, and you know, you're playing a huge part in all of that here at the port. What you mentioned also leads me nicely onto my next question, which also relates to our collaboration conversation, and that is about the Green Freeport. So tell me more about the Green Freeport. Obviously, you mentioned geographical sort of benefits of being closely located to wind farms that are already in the Forth and those that are about to go out into the Forth, but those that are still to be developed further afield beyond in the North Sea. And the Green Freeport will help Scotland to sort of capitalise on those opportunities. So how can that Green Freeport help Scotland compete on an international stage? And, you know, what benefits does a Green Freeport offer Forth ports, and how are you working with the partners that are also within that same zone?
The Green Freeport ties into the same conversation around business cases. So I would probably add that writing business cases for port infrastructure, in particular in the operating model that most of the major ports in the UK operate under, where their ownership is global pension funds. I mean, our ownership is some of the biggest Commonwealth pension funds, where they're really looking for an infrastructure fund that is in perpetuity, it's long term, it's sustainable. There's a real interest in you know, a business that is going to deliver consistency and all the other things that go with that, like, you know, your ESG, your safety performance, and it's just a really good investment. So that actually writing port-based business cases for infrastructure, you can do it a bit more speculatively, right? So you look at markets and you look at long-term 30, 40, 50-year infrastructure. The challenge to get supply chain to come into the UK is that you are competing on a global market. So at the moment, we've taken the first step to say, right, we can get the projects to be deployed out of the UK. So the consolidation of all the components will be delivered from wherever it is in the world. It then gets the final manufacturing piece added to it. So whether it's a pre-assembly or it's a final inspection or it's a test or whatever it's getting done, and then it gets deployed. To attract the big global companies that make these components is the trick. So they need certainty of pipeline of work. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we then need to make our facilities and our country, it's not really a port thing, this is a country thing, attractive as possible, because we are competing for this work on the global stage. Yep. Not on the local stage, not on the UK stage, the global stage. So what the free ports should be able to do is to offer a certain level of benefits to make our country more attractive to these businesses. That's really what I think.
Extra confidence.
That's yeah. So it's being able to compete on a global stage with other initiatives, because have no doubt there is other countries in the world, in the EU, that offer significant benefits for inward investment, and that's where Scotland needs to basically make sure that they are competing with that, because otherwise
Yeah.
We could have as much of this work as we have in the UK, and it can all just be supplied from elsewhere.
Yeah, the investor confidence piece, I think, is key to unlocking all of this. And there was a recent investor report that was a survey of investors that Deloitte published a few months ago. And a couple of the interesting statistics that came out of that were that 67% of investors think that the UK is an attractive place to invest. So I just think that's quite an interesting number. And they also looked at the sort of top key priorities that would increase that confidence to invest in the UK. And it actually covers a lot of the things that we've talked about. So it was about the supply chain and making sure that we have that strong, capable supply chain. It was also about streamlining consenting and grid and, unlocking all of those barriers and creating a stable, policy landscape that can, give that confidence. So it is a key piece to unlocking a lot of this. And, it's great to hear that the green free ports will play a role in attracting that inward investment. But can we just take a look at, gaze into your crystal ball? What does the future hold for the facilities beyond this beyond this period? And the same with Forth Projects. What are your ambitions for the next steps? I know there's obviously the sort of next generation of offshore wind technology within floating. And I know that Forth Ports has some ambitions around the Burnt Island facility for that. So paint a picture of the future across the Forth Ports, Scottish locations and at Forth Projects as well.
Burnt Island concept is, again, it's us striving towards trying to fix the challenges that are laid out for Scotland. So when you look back, it was port capacity. So we fixed port capacity. You then say, right, well, what's the next challenge? It's like, well, because the deeper water of Scotland, floating offshore wind, floating foundations, which changes the requirements, the technical requirements. It was a bit about if you think of one of the questions that we discussed earlier on about future-proofing, Burnt Island's a really good example of that. So what is the challenge of floating offshore wind? Well, again, it's deep water, it's ports, but it's also about rapid deployment capability. So when we come to doing floating offshore wind, now we've actually done one of the floating offshore wind projects out at Dundee. We were one of the first to do Wind Float 1. And that was a really big learning curve for us. And we've taken that learning, combined it with what we've learned about from the turbine OEMs and listened to the market and came up with this, and it's probably getting a bit further on now than just a concept, this planned development into Burnt Island. And what that will, the challenge that will solve is the ability to deploy floating offshore wind at pace. It will be a high capacity, high turnaround facility because there's nothing different with floating offshore wind with the current developments. You need to be able to deliver these within a certain time window, so a season or 2 seasons. And the economics in offshore wind are always tight, they're always challenging. It's a project funded industry, and in order to make floating offshore wind deliverable, it's not just about coming up with concepts. It's about having something that can actually do it in a very, very rapid deployment rate. And that's really what Burnt Island is. Burnt Island is a enhancement to our multi-port strategy. So at the moment, we are now doing the Port of Dundee as the turbine marshalling facility, the Port of Leith as the foundation marshalling facility, and effectively we will be able to deploy projects out of these two for fixed foundation in a very, very timely manner. Yeah. We've managed to move away from having to, because of the water depth at Leith and the absolutely massive dredging programme that we're currently going through, we're actually able to get the installation vessels to the quayside in Leith, which is amazing because what that means is then we're not having to do transshipment with barges and complexity and cost and risk. So then we then go into Burnt Island, we're into floating foundations. So these two ports have then got the ability to continue doing what they do and finishing the manufacturing process for the OEMs, and then the integration gets done at Burnt Island, and we can then meet the timeline demands of the industry. And it's going to be a really industry changing concept that we're going to deliver in Burnt Island, I would say. Really excited about it, actually.
So that sort of big vision, overall arching picture is the, inward investors in the Green Freeport Zone working on that manufacturing piece, and then the multi-port approach to the marshalling, final assembly and load in, load out commissioning and all of that activity all taking place around these areas. So
Yeah,
a huge hub of activity.
Yeah, I mean, the vision, that's exactly the vision. So the vision that we have to turn this from a project based into an industry is quite compelling. So you've got industry-wide collaboration, you've got multi-port strategy where you've got 2 ports that have got a proven track history, have got industry class future-proofed facilities which are delivering today. You've got a supply chain that gives the industry confidence. So we've integrated into the supply chain with Forth projects, and we are now delivering to de-risk it for our clients. We then want to build an industry around this using the Green Freeport capability and what that can offer to build a strong, resilient supply chain, giving everybody the opportunity, collaborating with Scotland, because this is a Scotland PLC thing, and then looking at the future of how we deliver the government's green ambitions of floating offshore wind. I mean, that's our vision. It's really exciting. No, it's not. But I would say we're probably about 80% of the way through delivering it. So it's vision to reality. That's what we are doing.
And then you have Callum with all of his amazing gadgets, moving everything around and managing all of that whole logistics piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think credit to David on this, it really is, because really what Forth Ports is becoming is this solution to fixed and floating wind. And it really is credit to David for this, because he's been the catalyst for that.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing within this sector as well. It's like the scale of everything. It's about thinking big. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, bold and big.
But it's also, I think it's the same as as coming up with PowerPoint ideas. Delivery is just as important as vision. And I think when we look at the delivery of Forth projects and what is going on in Leith, I don't think you can underestimate on how grand a scale this is. I mean, the equipment that Callum is currently procuring is world class. I mean, it's absolutely amazing technology from some of the best manufacturers in the world. So again, we're doing everything from having best in class infrastructure to best in class technology, people, and equipment. It's really game changing,
Yeah, and it's an exciting place to be, especially from David and I both coming from the offshore industry where it's very high standards. It's bringing this to Forth Ports and really helping deliver these projects.
Yeah.
I think you've got to pinch yourself sometimes though, because when you're standing down on the quayside and it's like, are we really in Dundee?
Yeah.
And,
especially when the sun's out.
The sun's out. I know. It's like you look at it and you go, this is exactly what we want for the city. We want to have the city as being this epicenter of offshore wind and renewables, and the energy transition, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I remember working on offshore wind projects previously, and we were mobilising from Dundee, and that was maybe 7 years ago. And to where we are now, it's night and day. But it's world-class infrastructure, and it's a really exciting place to be.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear you talk so passionately about it as well, because I feel exactly the same, and I think that's a thing. Like, offshore wind really does present that opportunity to rejuvenate, coastal communities, and so yeah, fantastic to hear about that. So we have covered a lot of ground today. I think it's quite clear that you have such a passion, both of you individually, for offshore wind and for what you do here at Forth Ports and Forth Projects. And it really is a pivotal time for offshore wind. We've been talking about how we maximise that opportunity, and I think it's that we're at that point where we need to shift from sort of that, planning into delivery. And, we need to be thinking big so that we can harness this opportunity. And, for people that are not in the sector, it would be good to sort of just hear your thoughts on what you would say to them, to what opportunities there are, what advice you would give for people who want to move into such an exciting space. So what's your advice for those aspiring, whether that be people early in their career or people actually in other sectors who are looking to move into renewables? What would you say to them?
Do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
I think that the opportunities within ports is largely underestimated in the sort of the wider economy. I mean, like I say, when I was a graduate in Dundee, I didn't even think about the port, and I think that's where once you actually start working in ports, you realise like how strong a community that the ports are, and there is a tremendous longevity of service within our ports, and everybody that I've met is incredibly passionate. They've got this level of like caring about their job, about the pride in what they do, and I was quite surprised at that from, coming from oil and gas, where it's you work all over the world, you move around, and it's quite normal for people to move jobs and to do that. Ports, people tend to basically stay working in them forever. And there's a reason for that, because it's a great place to work. It's a great place to come in. The variety of what you can be involved in ports, and it's not just renewables is just one small part of that, and it's a probably quite a prevalent part just now because it's quite it's a big deal. But actually, there's so much more other industries. And the great thing in ports is it touches every industry, from construction materials to agriculture to general cargoes. We handle everything from timber through to fertilizers through to bricks and aggregates, and you get the opportunity to be involved in such a diverse landscape. So you could do everything from driving big bits of plant to maintaining infrastructure, to being involved in electrical networks, networks, to almost like household electrical stuff, to working on the plant, to driving the plant, to working in big cranes, to SBMTs, to even from being you could be a solicitor with us, you could be a business analyst, you could be a new graduate that just wants to figure out what they want to do, to management, to supervisors, to driving pilot boats, to driving state-of-the-art tugs. The diversity of this industry in the port sector is phenomenal. The opportunity in that is phenomenal. And I think the challenge that our industry has is attracting people to want to come into that. And I think we're making huge strides in that. Certainly in Forth Ports we are. We've got talent acquisition teams now where we're trying to do it in such a way when we're actually, like what Callum's doing with Forth Projects, that we don't just go, I've got 5 jobs available in the Port of Leith and seeing what happens. It's more about trying to tell the story of like, this is what your career path looks like. Come and join us and be part of something great. And that's really what this is. It's not about renewables. It's not about just one sector. It's about the port industry. And once you're in, you'll never want to leave because it's such a great place to be. But that's my view. Anyway, certainly. I don't know about you, Callum.
What a sales pitch.
No, David's hit the nail on the head, really. Previously, before joining Forth Ports, I had absolutely no idea about ports, Forth Ports, or anything in general. Working offshore on the installation vessels, you'd come into the ports and then you'd leave again, and you had no idea about the ecosystems in terms of the markets and the people and the skills and the professionals who are within the ports. And really, Forth Ports is a testament to that. There's such a broad range of opportunities there that if individuals want to be involved there, I would say reach out, have the conversations, and no one will decline that. Really, it's the conversations there to have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, personally, something I didn't mention earlier was that my background is actually in ports and fabrication, and I spent sort of my early career, being out and about on big infrastructure projects, and it was so interesting. And obviously now I'm in Scottish Renewables, which is right at the forefront of the renewable energy industry in terms of that policy making piece, and it's such a journey that I've gone on myself. And my background was a degree in business studies and psychology, so it's not an obvious pathway to go into renewable energy. And I think that's what people should be aware of, that there is, like you said, lawyers, and there's so many diverse opportunities and career paths for people in renewable energy, so it's really exciting. Okay, so I just want to move us on to a little segment that I call A Star and a Wish. Maybe we can get a jingle for this little segment just to finish us off. So I'd just like to sort of end the conversation with a sort of career highlight from each of you, and also a wish for the future. What has been one of your sort of most memorable moments, and what is your ambition for the next step? So Callum, we start with you. What is your your star and a wish?
Yeah, so I think my star, I think a big thing for me is being able to see the Inchcape project go from initial tendering through the contract and through into the operational delivery. It'd be a massive deal when we see those massive jackets, over 2,500 ton, 2,000 ton monopiles sitting on the quayside in the Port of Leith. I think that'll be, as David called it, a pinch me moment.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to that.
Where you can go out and smell it and touch it and see it.
It's a reality, and it's quite a big deal, especially coming from a project background, seeing something from initial conception through to finish. I think it's going to be a massive deal.
Yeah, a huge sort of moment in your career. And then even just looking further forward, what's your sort of next wish for the future?
I think it's really scaling up Forth projects. So as we come into the phase of delivering the Inchcape project, it's really looking at the future and seeing how we can support these projects on a much bigger scale. So we're moving into the world of our principal contractor, developing our people, making sure that they understand how to do their roles and grow them as individuals. Really, it's really scaling Forth projects.
So you're going to be busy then?
We'll be very
You have a very long to-do list and lots to do. Sounds great. And then David, what about you? What's your star and your wish?
My star is being able to sit and reflect on how you're taking an idea, which arguably you could call a strategy, and developing it and delivering it to a point where you see the community, the people benefit from that. So like, I don't just take the fact that we're building new infrastructure, it's good for business, it's a good business case, and it's going to get us a return. That's important, but actually I see it as it's giving people that work in the port and the wider supply chain the opportunity to flourish. And I think that's what drives me, is that when I stand on the quaysides in Dundee and I look around and I go, this is really good for all of us. It's really good for the business, because business performance allows us to do better and to grow, and the more we grow, the better we do. But at the same time, it is, there's a real sense of pride, the fact that Callum's sitting next to me today, off the back of us coming up with a strategy and delivering it. He's now in a position where he's now going out and recruiting more people, and we're trying to build an industry. That's my career star. I really look at that and say, is success of taking strategy to delivery has got so many different levels to it, and giving the people the opportunity to grow and to get employed within the ports is really important to me, I would say.
No, that's great. And it's like that blood, sweat and tears that you put into delivering that, right? It's a long journey, but then, as you say, to be at a point where you can kind of step back and you can look at, here is the positive impact that this hard work has achieved. Obviously there's more to come and more ambition, but actually take stock and look at the positive impact we've had, the jobs that have been created, the businesses that have felt the impact, and the community that's also been brought along on that journey. So yeah, that's a very good, obviously very overarching star, but yeah, great. And then finally, your wish.
So I think my wish is, I think I would like to see Scotland succeed in delivering all of ScotWind before 2040. That's what I would like. So I would like to see the supply chain right through to the developers actually moving forward. So all the bottlenecks, like you said at the start, them becoming resolved and these projects going ahead. So the grid connection, the contract for difference, all these things, that would be my wish, because we're set up, we're ready, the supply chain's ready, everybody is at the cusp of delivery. We just need the opportunity now. So that's my wishes for the opportunity to come through. To
remove those policy and regulatory challenges so that we can get real progress.
We can get progress, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Well said. So David and Callum, thank you so much for talking to me today and for having me here at the Port of Dundee. So that kind of brings us to the end of our episode of the ForthCast, which was called Offshore Wind, Less Talk, More Walk. But I think it's clear from the course of the episode that Forth Ports is running. So yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Emma. It's been great having you today.
Yep, thank you very much, Emma. It's been a pleasure.